Hey everybody, this is Andy Duffey, pastor at Antioch Church of the Brethren, and I'm here with Pastor Bilbo, who's very distracted by people walking by. But we're not going to pay attention to that for the moment, because we're having another daily devotional today. And we're out here at Wade Park by the river, just enjoying the peace. Our story today is not a particularly peaceful one. We've been working with Jesus' last week on his journey to the cross and the first Easter, and we finally arrived, at least at the cross. Yesterday we talked about the first half of the crucifixion story in some of the Gospels. Today we're going to finish that narrative, and I have a quote from English author, actually Scottish author, J.M. Barrie, in his work Peter Pan, where he has Peter say, "To die would be an awfully big adventure." Keep that in mind as I read to you from Mark 15, verse 33. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone," they said. "Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down." With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. This is the account of Jesus' death according to Mark, and it's got many of those things that we often think about. It's got the lament of Jesus as he cries out, quoting Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And there's lots of different ideas about what that's about. Is Jesus really think that God has forsaken him? Is he talking about the way it feels, even if he knows it's different? Or is he just quoting the psalm to remind people that all of this is foretold as the way it should be? We're also here reminded of the people who will continue to mock him and wonder if even on the cross he'll reveal himself to be the Messiah. We have the curtain of the temple that's torn in two from top to bottom. The curtain was meant to separate the worshipers from the innermost place in the temple building, where the presence of God was said to dwell on earth among the people. So what does it mean that that curtain is broken? That God is no longer to be thought of as dwelling in one particular place. But somehow through Jesus' death, God now lives everywhere, with all people. We get the Roman guard who, in wonder, stares at Jesus' dead body on the cross and says, "Surely this man was the Son of God." We get the account of the women who watch tearfully and quietly. The most faithful of all of Jesus' followers. The women are here for the whole process, while the men are cowering in fear somewhere else. It's always interesting to compare this account to some others. Matthew is very similar to this. What's interesting is in Mark, the last thing Jesus does is he says he has a loud cry and a final breath. In Matthew, it says he gave up his spirit. The Hebrew words for breath and spirit come from the same idea. Our life is in our breath. When we stop breathing, our spirit goes back to God. In Matthew, there's a little more excitement besides the temple being torn. Matthew says there was an earthquake, and that a whole bunch of the bodies of holy people who had died were raised to life and appeared to people. Matthew's the only one that says anything about that. It's not referring to a zombie apocalypse. It's kind of a foretaste of the resurrection to come for all of us. In the Gospel of Luke, there are several other different pieces that don't appear in other Gospels, like Jesus saying the words, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," rather than a cry like that, a cry. Bilbo likes to cry out. Come here, bud. Come here. In Luke, he actually says something. He actually says, "I'm giving God you my spirit back." In Luke, there is no "God, why have you forsaken me?" The temple is still split. That's a recurring theme. And the Roman guard that looks at Jesus' body doesn't say, "Surely he was the Son of God." He says, "Surely this was a righteous or an innocent man." Luke is really emphasizing that Jesus is undeserving. That's kind of the lens through which Luke looks at the life of Jesus. And then, of course, we get John, who is always different. John emphasizes at the beginning of this passage, Jesus knew that everything had now been finished. And in John's gospel is the one gospel where Jesus says the words, "It is finished," before he surrenders his spirit. None of the other familiar beats in the other gospels are present in John. Maybe John assumes we already know them, but his emphasis is definitely elsewhere. And he includes this little story about the soldiers as they go around, and this is kind of gruesome, and they break the legs of the other thieves who are up on the crosses, because the practice at the time was it could take a long time for people to die from crucifixion. So to speed up the process, they would break their legs to make even more weight fall on their arms and their chest, and they would suffocate quicker. In Jesus' case, he's already dead. And just to make sure, Pilate orders that the soldiers confirm he is dead, so they stab him in the side with a spear, which John says confirms some other Old Testament scriptures. So in all four Gospels, there are some similar themes. The temple curtain being torn is a major theme, even more important to the Gospel writers, we might say, than the specific words that Jesus says on the cross. I don't know if we often think of it that way. Two of the Gospels talk about Jesus' last breath. Two of them talk about him surrendering his spirit. Wherever we are, we can think about that as we breathe. It's not just a physical thing, but there's also a spiritual element to our breathing in and out. I don't wonder if you remember the line I began with from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. To die would be an awfully big adventure. In the book of Peter Pan, there's a little side note in parentheses where it says if Peter, the boy who never wanted to grow up, if he had decided to grow up, maybe he would learn to say, to live would be an awfully big adventure. And in some crazy way, with Jesus' death on the cross is simultaneously terrifying death and the promise of new life bound into one. And that's the message of nature as we are out here with the symbols of crosses all around us in the trees and wherever we look. Jesus goes to the cross fully aware of what he's doing and aware that this needs to happen so that life can continue. So may we learn from Jesus' willingness to go to death on behalf of love, to give life to everyone. As you enter this Holy Week, truly live it and take time to notice your breath and the Spirit.